Probably philosophy is the only defined and redefined again and again, and you still find books coming up saying what is philosophy, addressing the question of what is philosophy. So that is the greatness of philosophy, in the sense that the perenniality, which some scholars criticize to be a weakness of a weakness of the discipline, is in fact an advantage of the discipline, in the sense that it still becomes relevant for all of us. Okay, so these ongoing controversies that we find in with regard to what is the meaning of philosophy, or definition of philosophy, or methods of philosophy, make us perplexed about the nature of philosophy. Okay, philosophy indeed has been one of the perennial quests of human civilization, through which human beings have expressed and redefined themselves. It is not that by defining philosophy, we are only defining a discipline elsewhere. We are also defining ourselves and our own conceptions of the knowledge and reality and our relation towards them. And in this context, we should look at how philosophy is understood in India. It is understood as darshana. So, what is this darshana? No, it is not just darshana. The word may mean, no, if you take it literally, seeing or vision. Okay, but it is not just seeing the obvious that is there in front of you. Darshana doesn't ask you to look at the thing that is available in front of your eyes. It says go beyond. Okay, that is all. The other name that is provided to Indian philosophy is, along with darshana, tattva. Tattva means going to the actual core of whatever you are looking at, and seeing not the obvious, seeing the core of what you are looking at. Okay, so tattva is the basic element of what you are looking at. So that is how darshana shastra and tattva shastra together tell us that it is not the obvious thing that is in front of you, that in front of your eyes, that you have to know, but you have to go to the depth and try to understand what it is. Okay, that is how when we try to do that, no, how do you do that? There are two things at least which are important when we say seeing, or knowing through seeing. Okay, knowing through seeing the basic element of what is being seen, right? So in this particular sense, definitely the object is important and the subject is important, and the relation between the object and subject is also important. This is where, essentially, if you go by the definition of darshana as representing Indian philosophy, in fact, it represents the epistemological perspective of philosophy. Okay, when you talk about tattva, then it represents the metaphysical aspect of Indian philosophy. So, it would be interesting to understand philosophy in terms of these two. As all of us, as human beings, are curious beings, and this curiosity makes us restless to know more about the world and reality around us. A person encounters various opinions or beliefs in everyday life, right? All of us have various beliefs and opinions in our everyday life, and these beliefs are duly supported by the right to constitute our knowledge. Okay, whether these beliefs really constitute our knowledge, or are they justified to be a part of our knowledge, or the unquenchable thirst that we have to acquire knowledge is justifiedly rooted, or some of the important aspects that we have to always think when we talk about philosophy. So that is how philosophizing is also an aspect of knowing, aspect of seeing, aspect of conceptualizing, an aspect of visualizing the or justifiedly visualizing the ultimate reality. So all these aspects form a part of philosophy, and a part of philosophizing itself. So I sometimes say, why is it that epistemology is important? I basically believe one thing, that epistemology determines metaphysics. This is what I believe. Okay, and when I say that, what I mean is the way you conceptualize the knowledge, the way you use your pramanas to gain the knowledge, okay, the instruments of knowledge that lead you, the nature of knowledge according to you, and the instruments that you choose to reach out to that knowledge, these two are the ones which decide what kind of reality that you can conceptualize. Okay, for example, if I choose these glasses, then the kind of reality that I see is such and such. If I remove these and I wear these sunglasses, then the reality that I see would be different, right? So that is how this is the instrument, and this instrument, okay, I'm talking about metaphorically. I'm talking these instruments or pramanas, and the kind of pramanas that you choose, the kind of definition of the pramanas that you give, and the kind of nature of knowledge that you have conceptualized decide what kind of reality that you actually want to have a look at, or the kind of metaphysics that you can envision. Okay, so that is how I believe that if you have a worldview within yourself, if you have a conception of reality within your mind, okay, these two are largely constructed by your metaphysics. Okay, the way you are asked to look at the things, the way you are taught to gain knowledge, the ways through which you have experienced and conceptualized your knowledge, okay, or knowledge of the reality or the reality itself, are basically important in determining your metaphysics. So your worldview, your belief system are based on your epistemology, and that is how epistemology is very crucial for every individual. That is why, friends, they say education system is very important, because your epistemology is built, constructed, and developed through your education system. The generations of people uh, conceptualize or develop their metaphysical system, or develop their worldview or belief system based on their kind of education. So that's how they say education system has to be properly developed, so that you will have proper belief system, and the proper belief system and worldview are the ones which help you in acting in the world in a suitable way, and that is how you would become a peaceful, a seeker of a peaceful coexistence, or a person who is more disruptive in nature and doesn't really aspire for peace, right? So that is how the way people act in the society is largely based on their belief system, and the belief system is largely based on the epistemology, or the education system, or the way you are taught to look at things, learn the reality, conception of reality. So that is why, I'm just trying to stress the importance of epistemology. Okay, so that is why epistemology plays a very significant role in the life of each one of us. That is how we have to give more than sufficient importance to a study of epistemology. And this is exactly the reason why Nyaya system says we are more concerned about epistemology than metaphysics. In order to understand, reach out to metaphysics, what is required is a proper systematic analysis of how do I know that? Okay, so epistemology was given primary importance, and in this context, let me also, while introducing me, our friends have introduced me as somebody who is interested in philosophical counseling, who is working on that. So even in the context of philosophical counseling, for me, Nyaya philosophical system is very important. Okay. Anyway, I'll come to that a little later. So having established the importance of epistemology, because it talks about nature and possibility of knowledge. It is not just about the nature, it is also the possibility of knowledge, in the sense of what are the instruments that provide you knowledge. So epistemology tries to address questions like what is knowledge, how is knowledge acquired, how do we know what we know, how do we know what we know, is human knowledge trustworthy, can our senses be traced, what are the differences between opinion, knowledge, and wisdom, why are some forms of cognition not accepted as valid. For example, some of the schools do not accept Smriti Jnana as valid. Some schools accept that. So these are all very important questions that we address within the domain of epistemology. And it is also very important to know that, in fact, Gautama, who has authored Nyaya Sutra, has discussed this aspect of epistemology very well. But one of the very important things that we should know as students of philosophy is how epistemology is closely linked to logic. Okay. So in India, in the West, you would find epistemology and logic being discussed separately, starting from Aristotle onwards or Plato onwards. But when it comes to Indian systems, say, for example, if you're talking about Nyaya Sutra, this is dated to be something around 2nd century AD. And during that time, they have looked at both epistemology and logic to be allied ones, or probably they were understood or developed within the same fold, right? So, which means the way you conceptualize is based on the logical structure of your thought process itself. That is how epistemology invariably involves logic and rationality for them, logic and inferences, etc., for Indian tradition. But for Western tradition, they could make a distinction between mediate and immediate inference, and then develop it as a separate branch like syllogism, discussing syllogism, etc. But when it comes to Indian tradition, these were very much a part of it, right? So within the fold of inference, Anumana Pramana, they could discuss the whole of logic, Indian logic within that fold. So that is how logic and epistemology or allied branches in Indian tradition. This is specifically visible in Nyaya, of course, in Jainism and Buddhism as well. The other important aspect that we should know when we are talking about epistemology is how it is closely associated with psychology. Okay. So when it comes to the relation between epistemology and psychology, the question that is being addressed is, where do the first and the second begin? Where do the epistemology and where does the psychology begin? So it is very difficult to find out the disjuncture between these two in Indian tradition, because the very concepts that are discussed in epistemology form a part of the discussion of psychology as well. Psychology, as we understand, is a scientific discipline that studies mental states, processes, and behaviors in humans and sometimes in animals as well. It means that the subject matter of psychology is how human mind works, whereas epistemology deals with on what the mind's work explain as distinct is not clear. Okay, so both of them seem to be addressing the similar kind of concerns. Okay, that is how the relation between the psychology and epistemology is also very close. Okay, and this aspect is very important, and that is how when you have works on Indian psychology, basically you would wonder whether there is anything new other than what we discuss in epistemology that is being discussed in Indian psychology, right? So you open these 3 volumes or 4 volumes that have come on Indian psychology, and also recent studies on Indian psychology. All of them would be basically talking about Indian epistemology. Okay, so that shows the affinity between these two. So having said that, okay, let me proceed to another important aspect that I would like to discuss. Just a minute. Let me reach to the Nyaya epistemology. Okay, when I'm looking at Nyaya epistemology, basically, all of you are already aware that Nyaya epistemology is basically realistic and pragmatic, and they accept correspondence theory. So, which means, this is the point that I would like to make actually. How is this Nyaya epistemology more useful for philosophical counseling? Friends, we all know that it is the first work that we find is Nyaya Sutra, which was written by Gautama in 2nd century AD. And then there are interpreters of Nyaya Sutra who have very wonderfully discussed the essence of Nyaya Sutra in their works. For instance, Vatsyayana and Udyotakara and Vachaspati Mishra, and later on Udayana as well. What is the major concern of Nyaya philosophy? Major concern of Nyaya philosophy is not just epistemology. Okay, they have chosen epistemology in order to reach that major concern. And what is that? Okay, so all these sutras, the Nyaya Sutra, and also the commentaries that I have mentioned about the 5 commentators who commented on Nyaya Sutra, all of them argue that epistemic success is central in search for happiness. So it is not that Nyaya is concerned about epistemology and it has nothing to do with the world around it. If that is the case, why do you call them realists or pragmatists? Their major concern is happiness. Okay, search for happiness. Okay, so this search for happiness makes them go further and try to understand what is the happiness and how do you reach out to that happiness. Okay, the desire for happiness is what prompts them to see that not probably, the knowing of the self is very important. And to conceptualize the self in a proper way, what is required is epistemology, and that is how they root themselves in epistemology. So basically, their major concern is, and in fact, this is the concern of most of the other schools of Indian philosophy as well, whether you take them to be uh, orthodox or heterodox. There is a criticism against Indian philosophy, saying that Indian philosophy is only otherworldly. It doesn't care about this world. But in fact, starting from Sankhya to any other system, Sankhya is considered to be the oldest system. And then you pick up any of these philosophical systems, Buddhism, Jainism, everyone, what they are addressing is happiness and avoiding sorrow, suffering, dukkha. Okay, how to avoid dukkha is the major concern. And in order to avoid dukkha, what is required is, for most of the schools, an inquiry, vichara, and the methods of this vichara, inquiry, may be different. Okay, for some it may be logical, for some it may be ethical, for some it could be metaphysical, and for some it could be epistemological. The methods would be different, but the concern is how to avoid dukkha. And people argued, saying that in order to avoid dukkha, you should get rid of false knowledge, avidya. And what is this avidya? They say this avidya is, or what is vidya or avidya? They say the knowledge of the self is what is vidya, and wrong knowledge of the self is what is avidya, or ignorance. And that is how the metaphysical conceptualization is rooted, basically has brought in basically to avoid the empirical suffering that we see in the world. So their major concern is definitely avoiding the suffering and reaching or going in search of happiness for almost all the Indian philosophical systems, whether they belong to heterodox tradition or orthodox tradition. So this is an important aspect that I want to stress, and that is how I say, in fact, it helps us more in philosophical counseling, right? Because the concerns of life that we have in engaging with various situations, various objects, various beings around us, fellow beings who are living with us, we come across certain problems which lead us to a kind of suffering. And how do you avoid that suffering is very well addressed. How do you reach out to the happiness is very well addressed in a realistic, pragmatic way by Nyaya system. And that is how Nyaya epistemology would be very helpful to, if any of you are interested in developing a philosophical counseling model on the basis of Nyaya epistemology, it would be very useful and very interesting. And people say, argue saying that there is a cognitive behavior therapy, etc., etc. And the problems of cognition are very much addressed here, okay, within a Nyaya fold. That is how basically Nyaya would be more helpful in inventing our own philosophical tools for philosophical counseling enterprise from Indian perspective. So that's one of my concerns. And if any of you are interested to come forward to work on this, you're most welcome, and that would be really helpful to you. So in this context, though it's not related to this, let me mention this, friends. I'm organizing an international conference on philosophical counseling, and those who are interested to present papers, please come forward and submit your papers. The one that I'm talking about is can also be one of the themes of your papers, right? So it would be during January, and the call for papers is out. I would share it with Dr. Lakshmi and Dr. Binu and other friends. So please circulate it among your friends and colleagues and students, so that we arrive at a better perspective of Indian conception of philosophical counseling, which may not be a unified kind of one, which could be a diverse and plural kind of one. So having said that, what I'm stressing here is Nyaya Sutra, basically, and its commentatorial tradition. What it tries to argue is that epistemic success, success of epistemology is central in search of happiness. If your epistemology fails, okay, then your search for happiness also fails. Okay, since we must understand the world properly if we desire to achieve goods it offers. Okay, if at all we desire the kind of things that we want from the world, which we want them to be true and real, then what is required is our epistemology, our instrumentation. As I said, my specs have to be proper, otherwise I will not see the reality in a proper way, and it will not lead to my happiness, successful activity. So Vatsyayana claims that while Nyaya metaphysical concerns overlap with the other, more scripturally based Hindu schools as well, what distinguishes Nyaya is a reflective concern with evidence, doubt, and the object of knowledge. Okay, discussing about a kind of reflective concern, because we understand that philosophizing is a reflective enterprise. So you have to be self-reflective about whatever you learn and whatever your epistemology is, metaphysics is, and ethics is. So being reflective of with regard to the evidence and with regard to the doubt and the object of knowledge is what is required. And this is where Nyaya is different from other philosophical schools, according to Vatsyayana. And he further defines Nyaya's philosophical method as the investigation of a subject by means of knowledge sources. Okay, so what are the sources of the knowledge is very important, so that you will have a right kind of understanding of the reality. Otherwise, if your sources of knowledge are wrong, if your sources of knowledge are wrongly placed, wrongly founded, then you will not reach out to the reality or understanding of your own self in a proper way, and that will not lead you to happiness that you're looking for. Okay. Importantly, the pramanas are not just simply the means by which individual attains veridical cognition. They are also the final court of appeal in philosophical dispute. And we understand that Nyaya accepts four pramanas, basically pratyaksha, anumana, upamana, and sabda. Okay, and it's not that they just talked about valid means of knowledge. They also spoke about invalid forms of knowledge in terms of memory, doubt, error, and hypothetical argument. And in fact, this is where, friends, I would argue that if we analyze Nyaya conception of doubt, error, memory, and hypothetical argument in a proper way, we would be able to see various instances in our everyday life where we do not have a proper understanding or proper knowledge of the things around us, whether they are related to the objects around us, whether they are related to the fellow beings we have around us, or whether they are related to our own experiences. Okay, and we can find solutions or methods of resolving such kind of problems that I am talking about by analysis of these four invalid forms of knowledge that Nyaya talks about. Okay, so a proper analysis in terms of philosophical counseling of memory, doubt, error, and hypothetical argument is required, which would be very helpful in building a wonderful tool of philosophical counseling for us. And there is one more important point that I want to mention about whether we in general, in the West, we understand that, especially after Descartes, we understand that epistemology begins with doubt. Okay, in fact, there are Descartes is the one who began with the doubt. Okay, epistemological doubt, and then constructed a indubitable system according to his own words. Right. Yeah, it is important that doubt plays a significant role in our quest for knowledge. Okay, unless you doubt, if you blindly accept what it is, then there is no possibility of reflection, and then there is no possibility of understanding whether it is actually true or false and going deep into its core, right? Tattva. So that is how definitely doubt plays a key role. But when it comes to, and doubt plays a key role in various Indian philosophical systems as well. And even Nyaya, okay, which is a staunchly anti-skeptical tradition of epistemology, it does give important role to doubt, which, as seen above, triggers reflection because it triggers reflection and philosophical review. It also rejects the notion that doubt should be the starting place in philosophical reflection. Okay, Nyaya, though it gives important place to Indian epistemology because it triggers philosophical reflection, but it doesn't give important, significant place in terms of the starting point of philosophical investigation. So it says starting point of philosophical investigation should not be the doubt. Doubt is required whenever it is required, but the starting point of epistemological inquiry should never be doubt, according to Nyaya. This is a very important departure, and also very important point to stress, because our life is not just based on doubt all the time. Our inquiry doesn't begin with doubt. Because we say, some scholars have said, philosophical enterprise, philosophizing begins with wonder, looking at the world and wondering. Okay, that's how people say philosophy begins in wonder. And some people like Descartes have argued that philosophy begins in doubt. You doubt it so that you can go further. But this Nyaya philosophical system argues, what is the starting point of knowledge? It says starting point of knowledge is trust. It is not the doubt. Okay. So he says doubt itself should be motivated, as trust is a better default starting place in both ordinary life and in philosophy. because the pragmatism and realistic position has to reconcile the everyday life as well as the philosophical, deeper philosophical reflection. So what they argue is, they argue that trust is a better default starting place than doubt, according to Nyaya. And they argue pragmatically, Nyaya argues that the role of epistemology is to better hone our cognitive abilities in order to succeed in our life aims. Okay, so in order to achieve our life goals, whatever it may be, if you want to like qualify for the civil services or want to complete your research and become a teacher, whatever goal that you have, and if you would like to reach the success of that or succeed in that effort, then what is required is you have to hone your cognitive abilities. You have to work on your cognitive abilities, right? And that is how Nyaya gives a significant place to epistemology. But unrestricted doubt, what will happen if you have unrestricted doubt? Unrestricted doubt would undermine our ability to function on a basic level, and it therefore militates against the very point of epistemological inquiry. So that is one of the important reasons why it says you have to begin with trust than doubt, because unrestricted doubt will not put you in a very determinate position to go further. So your very beginnings will be very shaky, and you can never reach out to a formidable position about your inquiry. Okay. Theoretically as well, that's the pragmatic way of understanding. Theoretically as well, Nyaya argues that error and indeed doubt itself are conceptually parasitical on true cognition. Nyaya argues that the error as well as doubt, both of them are parasitical on true cognition, and that is how they have secondary importance than true cognition and trust in the in your own cognitive capabilities. Okay. And this is a very important aspect, so that's how I thought I should stress this point of how trust is given the basic fundamental space for the beginning of epistemological inquiry than doubt in Nyaya epistemology. So coming to the point that how do we look at the knowledge, and when we talk about knowledge, as I said, basically epistemological inquiry is about with regard to knowledge. That's what we have understood. It's about nature and the possibility of knowledge. And in the possibility of knowledge, we come across the pramanas that we are talking about. And what is the nature of knowledge is also an important element that we have to address when we talk about Nyaya epistemology. Nyaya, in fact, as I said, is the first systematic account of epistemology. Systematic account of epistemology. There are certain things that are important when we are trying to understand epistemology. One is jnana, which is understood to be knowledge, and the other one is buddhi, which is defined as cognition, and also the object of knowledge and the subject of knowledge. Okay. Prameya and pramata. Okay, the object of knowledge and the subject of knowledge. So basically, how does this knowledge or the cognition come into existence? Knowledge here is understood to be cognition, and how is this cognition defined? It is defined by Nyaya as apprehension or consciousness. Okay, it is understood to be apprehension. Okay, what kind of apprehension is it? Nyaya, being realistic, believes that knowledge reveals both the subject and object, which are quite distinct from itself. So when we look at this process of knowledge, three things come into the picture. One is knowledge, one is subject, and one is the object. And they say knowledge is like lamp which illuminates, both subject and the object. Okay, all knowledge is a revelation or manifestation of the objects. That is how Artha Prakasho Buddhihi. They call it Artha Prakasho Buddhihi, which means all knowledge is revelation or manifestation of the objects. Just as lamp, when you get into a dark room, you don't see anything at all. Whether you will not understand, whether you will not be able to see yourself or cognize yourself and the objects around you. So once there is light in the room, when there is a lamp that is brought into the room, the lamp manifests physical changes placed, physical things placed before it. Okay, and so knowledge reveals all objects which come before it. And in the similar way, knowledge, that's what determines whether knowledge is valid or invalid. Valid knowledge is called prama in Nyaya epistemology, and valid knowledge is defined as right apprehension of the object, yadhartha anubhava. Okay, so that is how the Nyaya epistemology is close to realism and also pragmatism. Not close, but it's close in the sense that the way we understand realism and pragmatism in the West and the way we explain it within this Indian tradition are slightly different. In that particular context, we can only say that it is close to realism and pragmatism that we understand. Let me just briefly, since I started with this usefulness of studying Nyaya epistemology for philosophical counseling, let me briefly talk about the invalid forms, and then I'll stop there, okay, so that we can have some discussion if possible. And there is some problem that I see with regard to my internet connectivity, okay, so please bear with me if there is any problem with the audio or video, okay. Yeah, what I say is, when it comes to this valid forms, we understand. I already mentioned saying that pratyaksha, anumana, upamana, and verbal testimony are accepted as valid means of knowledge. When it comes to invalid means, okay, these are very important to me because these are the ones because of which people suffer according to Nyaya. Okay, the suffering is not because of valid knowledge, valid means. It is because of the invalid means. And what are these invalid means? It talks about smriti, samsaya, viparyaya, and tarka. What is the smriti? Smriti is memory. And samsaya is doubt. And then error is viparyaya. And hypothetical reasoning is tarka. Okay. It says, see, in general, you would understand that smriti gives you knowledge. And you also believe that doubt gives you knowledge. Doubt leads you to knowledge, at least. And then you also understand you may keep error away, but you understand that hypothetical reasoning, tarka, also gives you knowledge. But very surprisingly, Nyaya argues that these three give you invalid knowledge. These are invalid forms of knowledge. These are invalid instruments of knowledge, right? It's really surprising that people in the 2nd century AD looked at and analyzed things around us within the framework of epistemology and logic, and have argued, not looking at something else, looking at the empirical everyday happenings of life, looking at them, they have analyzed and said that tarka, the hypothetical reasoning, would lead you to wrong knowledge, and that's what leads you to suffering. And doubt, if you begin with doubt and end with doubt, it is going to lead you nowhere, and the suffering would continue. And also smriti is one of the problems that leads you, one of the concerns that leads you to suffering. So the way they have developed it is very interesting, and this is where I believe these three, analysis of these three in relation to everyday happenings of life would definitely lead us to have a better understanding of what kind of suffering that we conceptualize in the everyday life, and also how to overcome that. Okay. For instance, they say smriti, when they talk about smriti, when they consider smriti to be not a valid kind of one, what they say, what Nyaya says is, it is not a presentative cognition, but merely a representative one. Okay, something that is already there in the memory is being presented here, and that so it's not a presentative cognition. Since it is not presentative, what is happening here is something that you have already remembered is presented here indirectly. So it's not a direct cognition, but it is an indirect cognition, and that is how it is considered to be an invalid kind of one, or not a valid kind of form of knowledge. So we, in everyday situation, we also understand that memory plays a great role in having a uh, continuing with the past knowledge, and also developing your future knowledge, and sustaining your present life, no, present way of understanding things and looking at things. Right. So in fact, it works as a link between past, present, and the possible future, right? But and also sometimes it is because of the smriti that we tend to enter into a kind of unhappy situations. So it is basically Nyaya is addressing such kind of situations, and it is saying that since it is not a presentative kind of one, not a direct kind of one, it may not really support you all the time in providing a proper knowledge of what the reality is. And that is how it may not be a proper kind of valid kind of means of knowledge. And friends, even in philosophical counseling, we use this smriti, memory. We understand that memory most of the times creates a problem, and the analysis of this memory is very important in order to avoid certain kind of uh, uh, problems, everyday problems that we come across. For example, people do talk about depression, etc. So what works at the background of this depression is memory. Okay, so that is a analysis of this aspect of invalid form of knowledge by Nyaya is very much required. What Vatsayana is saying about this, and what Gautama has said is very important here, and that's how I suggest that some of you should get into the actual debate that is involved in that, which would help you to develop a model for philosophical counseling. In the similar way, when it talks about doubt I have already spoken about. Doubt should not be the beginning. It is the trust that should be the beginning, but doubt definitely contributes to the development of the knowledge. But it itself cannot be the valid instrument of knowledge. The Because doubt is basically uncertainty in cognition. Since it is an uncertainty in cognition, it cannot lead you to successful activity, and that is how you will not be able to act at all if you are in the doubt. Okay, it is only the trust that makes you act and understand or verify whether the act is leading to successful activity. And that is how you will be able to understand the pragmatic and realistic position of Nyaya. Similarly, error, as I has already said, it is a misapprehension. It is a kind of wrong cognition, as it does not correspond to the real object. But look at this hypothetical reasoning. Tarka is also rejected. In inference, Tarka has a very important place. In fact, Nyaya analysis of inference and Tarka is very well explained in Charaka Samhita. You should read the first or second chapter of Charaka Samhita, where there is a wonderful discussion about Nyaya, epistemology. See, this is where it is important for us to know and understand that uh, epistemology is not a secluded discipline or enterprise of understanding. Epistemology is very much a part of metaphysics, and it is closely associated with other forms of other aspects of philosophy. Not just that, it is also closely associated with other forms of life, conceptions of life, conceptions of health. Okay, how you look at yourself is the basis of how you look at your health. What kind of thing you consider, what kind of state do you consider to be healthy, is understood on the basis of what kind of conception of yourself that you have. That is how epistemology plays a very important role, crucial role in understanding and conceptualizing your healthiness. Okay, so health is not just biological, and even if you consider health to be biological, how you conceptualize that biological health is a part of epistemology, and that is how you relate yourself. Health is also, these days we understood very clearly because of COVID-19 that health is not something that is to be nurtured by staying alone, aloof from the people. Okay, health is always, though individual has to take care of himself, it is also a social health, right? Because unless your neighbor is healthy, you understood now that you cannot be healthy. So in that way, health is also a social kind of one. And how do you relate yourself to the other in terms of the health is also a concern of the epistemology. That's what Nyaya talks about. And in this particular context, friends, how can somebody reject tarka, no, the rationality? And here, what is the rationality that they are rejecting? Hypothetical rationality. It's not that they are rejecting; they are saying that it doesn't lead you to valid knowledge. How? Because valid knowledge for them has to be pragmatic. It should result in successful activity. Since hypothetical reasoning cannot lead you to successful activity, since it cannot lead you to successful activity, it cannot give you it cannot be a valid means of knowledge according to him. For example, what happens in hypothetical reasoning, we would start with if and then kind of statements in a hypothetical statement. If this is so, that is so and so kind of ones. So what you are saying is, if this is okay, we don't know whether this is really the case, so we are not ascertaining that this is really the case and that would really be the case. So we are only saying if and then, if and but. So that is how it doesn't lead, it cannot be considered to be a valid means of acquiring knowledge, because it doesn't lead you to successful activity. It only remains at the level of hypothesis. So that is how it is being rejected. And I would consider that basically analysis or assessment of these would help us in our contemporary understanding, no contemporary analysis of the problems that we face. And in this context, I also believe the Nyaya uh, theory of error is also very important. Okay, Nyaya theory of error is called anyatha khyati. No, it is misapprehension. Okay, it is an error of commission. Okay, so for example, the famous example that is provided to us is snake and rope, right? So you go into a room and you see a snake there, and you come back and you shout and call people saying that it is snake. And again, when you go there for the second time, you understand that it is not snake, but it is only a rope. So in this kind of snake rope misapprehension, error, Nyaya considers this to be a kind of misapprehension. Okay, so it says both snake and rope, both of them are real, because first time when you went there and saw, you saw a snake, so definitely snake cannot be unreal. And similarly, next time when you went there, you saw a rope, so obviously rope cannot be unreal as well. So both snake and rope are real, very much real. Okay. Uh, so what happened here is, instead of one, you have apprehended the other. So that is the problem. Instead of one, you apprehending snake, apprehending rope, you have apprehended a snake. So the perception of the shape of rope interpreted are understood to be the snake, that which actually perceived elsewhere. So is it that the snake doesn't exist? No, snake exists. Is it that rope doesn't exist? Rope also exists. There are some similarities between the shape and form of both, which made you bring something that was that is elsewhere to be on this particular object, impose on this particular object that you have seen. So that is how something that is seen elsewhere is placed on the object that is in front of you, and that is how it is called anyatha khyati. Okay, something that you have seen elsewhere, anyatha, okay, is wrongly or misapprehended in the particular object that is in front of us. And what plays a very key role here is memory again. Okay, snake that was seen elsewhere and which was available in the memory is placed on the rope, and that is how there is a possible there is a misapprehension, and that is how this error is error of commission. So you have confused between two objects, and because of the similarity of some of their characteristics, and you place something that you have seen elsewhere on this particular object and apprehended it wrongly. Okay, so that is how connection between perception and memory is very important here, and the connection between perception and memory is confused, okay, is blurred the object that you are seeing, and that is how the wrong object is seen. That is how the error in the cognition happens according to Nyaya. Mind is connected to the object via memory. Neither of the two are unreal. One which is elsewhere is perceived here. And I'm intentionally talking about invalid forms and also error here, because even this error is also very important in addressing some of the concerns of philosophical counseling. The anyatha khyati always happens. You see something and you understand that to be something else on the basis of the memory that you have, though it actually doesn't, it may not be completely applicable in this particular situation. You still think that it is applicable, and that is how you have an error of cognition. So that is where the cognitive dissonance that we talk about, cognitive therapy that is required, can be very well developed from Indian perspective by looking at Nyaya philosophical system.